Last week's episode of Emotional Intelligence was seen through the lens of Disney Pixar's movie Inside Out 1 and 2. Though not perfect, it is a rather accessible way, I think, of looking at who's driving the control board in our emotion headquarters. This week, we're going to expand further on what happens when we encounter others, which requires both being able to regulate our own emotions as well as working with other emotions in the room. I'll be using Roy M. Oswald and Arlen Jacobson's book that also came out around the same time as Inside Out, which was a decade ago. And this book is called The Emotional Intelligence of Jesus: Relational Smarts for Religious Leaders. I know a couple of those words might have triggered you, the big JC being the obvious one, and religious perhaps coming a close second. And this would indeed be a good time to practice emotional intelligence and approach those triggers with curiosity. Hmm, I wonder why I feel the way I feel about these words. Or is there a way I could translate them so I could still find value in the concepts that Rev J is about to introduce? For me, it's like mining for gems, and there's a lot of gems to be mined here. I'm also not forcing anyone to read anything, by the way, full disclosure. I'm not getting any kickbacks or royalty from the publisher. And a third word that might trigger you from the title might be the word leader, because you may not feel like you are one and may even question the qualities necessary in order to be a good leader. Well, you know what? Life these days feels like this cartoon by Benjamin Schwartz. For those of you who may not be able to see the image, it says it's three aliens putting a space gun to two Earthlings. And the two Earthlings are saying, to be honest, I'm less troubled by the alien invaders than I am by the leader we're taking them to. This, of course, is a play on the usual alien lines of "Take me to your leader." So the bar for leadership seems rather low lately, perhaps. Or you could interpret this however you want to. We're a religious and not a political organization, after all. Again, you could apply this to any other setting if you want to as well. It doesn't necessarily have to just be religious or spiritual leadership. At work with your team or staff group, these concepts still apply, or in school when you're working on a project or a practicum. But again, since we're in the spiritual community, I'm applying these concepts to those who are already leaders here at First U, or maybe even for those of you who are leader curious and may consider taking on a leadership role within the congregation at some point. We have plenty of opportunities, by the way, for you to join a team, especially as we move into our new building. Marianne tells me that the hospitality team, for example, is currently taking recruits. That was a not so subtle pitch in case you missed it. There are three main attributes that will increase your relational smarts as a religious or spiritual leader. Number one is to be self-aware. According to Oswald and Jacobson, self-awareness is the capacity to identify moment by moment the thoughts, emotions, and body sensations occurring within us. Remember, I mentioned paying attention to our gut reaction last week as part of indigenous wisdom? Even if you don't, just nod anyway. That way I could see you nodding on the Zoom screen. Yes, there you go. Some of you remember that. Well, according to the authors, gut decisions are emotions backed by a sound rationale, meaning we can't just trust pure reason or logic, as helpful as it is. And if we lead with emotions all the time, that too can be highly variable from moment to moment. In other words, we need a good combination between emotions and reason affirmed by our body's own sense of knowing. A holistic approach makes that connection between our mind, our body, and our spirit. Interestingly enough, narcissists are so disconnected, they are simply incapable of self-reflection and self-awareness. This is why they can never be held accountable, and they always deflect blame on others because of their limited thinking and feeling skills. In their own minds, they can do no wrong. Sound familiar? The other thing narcissists are incapable of is empathy, which is a key ingredient for the second quality of a relationally smart leader. Empathy is crucial in building social awareness. People who lack the skill can actually end up abusing others. Notice too, by the way, that the authoritarians who are often in charge these days hate the word empathy and compassion. It is seen as a quote unquote weak trait. To empathize is not to capitulate and be a yes person all the time, in my mind. There's a difference between empathy and agreement. According to Oswald and Jacobson, we often confuse empathy and agreement, thinking that if we are empathizing with someone, it means that we are conceding that the person is right. The opposite of agreement is disagreement, and the opposite of empathy is apathy, end quote. We need to make a distinction between the two when our team or committee is having a discussion about an issue, especially one that's polarizing or controversial. We can practice deep listening and even nod in affirmation when that person is speaking because we could tell that they're passionate about it and care deeply. But we may not necessarily agree with the direction they're heading towards or what they want to have accomplished. There's a difference between being heard and being agreed with. You probably heard someone say, "You're not hearing me." And they'll repeat their talking points over and over and over again until everyone else in that room gives in out of a sense of exasperation. For me, that's not good leadership. It's called bullying and bulldozing. We can't and we don't get our way all the time, and our job is not to keep pushing until we do. After all, it's okay to agree to disagree as long as we still hear each other out and go through the due process, also known as our Unitarian Universalist fifth principle. Remember that? It calls us to respect the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. You're not the only one in our congregation who has an opinion, but how do we hold the bigger picture more tightly than our own personal agendas? This is why social awareness is also organizational awareness. How is what you're proposing or suggesting in alignment with our congregation's mission, vision, and values? Having disagreements and differences of opinion is perfectly normal and can be a part of the growing process. After all, from my experience, I've only witnessed conflict occur in one type of congregation, the ones with people in it. That's why what we've learned about dismantling white culture supremacy is to not be conflict averse, but rather to lean into it. So, part of the third quality of a leader who is relationally smart is knowing how to manage relationships, especially when they go sideways. Oswald and Jacobson equate relationship management with conflict management, as well as coaching, mentoring, and influencing to ensure that teamwork takes place. I would say it's more than just managing conflict, as if to imply that our goal is to make sure that all conflicts eventually disappear. But to hopefully, like the story we heard about the enemy pie, to transform relationships so that everyone grows as a result. My friend and former colleague at the UUA, the Reverend Tandy Rogers, um, keeps hammering this point in, which took me a while to grasp. She says that when conflict happens, we ought to shout, Hallelujah, because faith formation is about to take place. I wish I had that attitude all the time, right? When it comes to conflict. And I believe that the reason why conflict is often avoided is because sometimes we've seen the level of damage that conflict can do to a congregation. Yes, it's true that conflict can, in fact, sometimes blow up congregations. But in my opinion, that's if conflict was handled poorly and addressed way too late. Conflict, in some ways, it's like cancer. If it's a lower stage, treatment is more likely to be effective, as opposed to stage 4 cancer, for example, where it's much more difficult when you catch it way too late. So similarly, in a level 4 church conflict, the anger level is usually quite high, and the minister is the one that usually becomes the lightning rod and often ends up leaving. And guess what happens when the minister leaves? A big chunk of the congregation leaves as well. The trick is obviously not to get to that level of conflict, to nip it at the bud and to de-escalate sooner rather than later. And to not simply call out people, though there are probably instances where that's warranted and helpful at the moment, but to also call each other back in, and that is back in to right relationship. This year, I've had the opportunity to revisit the covenant for our board, staff, transition task force, and the settled minister search task force. A covenant is a sacred promise we make to one another on how we are to behave in this sacred space that we create for one another. It is something that we enter into freely, knowing that it is quite often quite aspirational, and we may at some point fall out of covenant as well. What's more important is instead of ostracizing the one who may have made a mistake, often unintentionally, by the way, is to call that person back into covenant while naming the impact or the harm done as well. Because there are times when someone in your team is simply going to flake on you and not follow through with a task that they've taken on, or not return your emails, or make a mistake that could be considered an epic fail, or say something gas utterly inappropriate at a meeting. God knows that's never happened to any of us, right? We've never been guilty of that. No, 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 not Yvonne, not me, not any of us sitting in the Zoom room right now. So what happens when those moments happen? Instead of saying, you suck, or that you're now officially banned from our group, we hope to never ever see you again. How can we approach that moment as a covenantal one and to figure out how to bring them back into the fold? That is the deeply spiritual work, and that requires spiritual discipline to not shame and blame, but to approach the situation with curiosity. I wonder what's going on for them right this very minute. And how could I name the harm done in a loving way to bring that person back into the fold? You may be thinking to yourself, that's just not me, Rev J. How could I be that assertive? Haven't you heard of Canadian Nice during the time that you've been here? We're not New Yorkers. We're not that aggressive. Well, according to the authors of the book, assertiveness is an acquired skill that involves being clear about where one is emotionally, one's needs and wants, and one's objections to certain things, such as boundaries and limitations, while at the same time being concerned about the impact one's behavior has on others. So the goal is to muster enough courage to hold these difficult conversations so that actually at some point what ends up happening is the result is could be a gift for both of you in the future because the relationship just might grow and transform out of a conflict. It is a way that the congregation can transform toxic interchanges into a life-giving and affirming one. This book, of course, has so much more to say about various aspects of ministry, but I'll limit it to these 3 points. Remember the 3 points, what it takes to be a relationally smart spiritual leader? Number one, self-awareness. Number two, social awareness. And number three, relationship management. For at the end of the day, the result may not be numerical growth, but spiritual growth. So let me read the excerpt to you once more that I read earlier, because I think it's worth repeating. They say, while everyone wants churches to grow, increase giving, and function more smoothly, the real goal of the church experience is an ongoing process of conversion toward a more deeply interiorized, lived out, compassionate, generous, grateful, and grace-filled spiritual life. Let us let these words sink in, and let's take a few more deep breaths in silent reflection.